be relevant.
There's
Okay, so really good, really good. Welcome very much. In the audience, welcome very much to Conversations. A dear friend of mine and the world, that being Sara Flounders. She's the co-director, co-founder. She's been on the scene of being concerned with political realities and for movement for elemental justice. She's associated with the International Action Committee, founded and inspired by a great man, Ramsey Clark. And she's done great work. She works in terms of trying to advance justice and an understanding of the injustice that's so endemic to the world. Sara Flounders, welcome very much to Conversations. All the best to everybody at International Action Center. Understand you all are down at Hooverville, or what do you call it, Bloombergville?
That's right, Bloombergville. Yeah. And this has really been going on now I think this is the 10th, maybe it's the 11th day of an encampment, an effort to mobilize opposition to the budget of huge cutbacks that Bloomberg is trying to ram through New York City budget. And so here you have one of the richest men, you know, who is also mayor, a multi-billionaire, whose wealth has tripled while he's been in office, supposedly collecting no pay, but, you know, this is how the banks do it. New York City has no deficit. It does not have a deficit, and yet he is trying to push through enormous cuts, close firehouses, close schools, close after-school programs, libraries, really one thing after another, attacking all the unions.
If there's no, if there's no deficit, why would they be, she must work 18 hours a day because she does so much doing that if there wasn't a problem. There is problems in other parts of the country and in the world, Greece and so forth.
Right.
But if there isn't, why would they do that? Is it ideologically driven or what?
Well, in a period like this, every one of the banks who Bloomberg represents want to take full advantage of the climate and of demanding givebacks and takebacks and frontal attacks on the unions, raising tuition at the city university, at the state schools, all of that. They tell us now that the state has a big deficit, but of course that deficit could end in a minute if instead of freezing social programs, they simply froze the interest payments to the banks. End of deficit problem. But those are the directions they're never, ever willing to go.
And that lesson has meaning at another state, a higher level in terms of the national and the world economy as well, I think. It's a pattern, a paradigm.
Well, what the workers are showing in Greece is that you can either accept this and see everything grabbed back, everything sliced, everything attacked, or you can mobilize and fight back and refuse to accept it. So I think the young people down at Bloombergville are inspired by what they see in Egypt, what they see in Greece, what they saw in Madison, that the efforts to really resist, to just dig in your heels and refuse to be turned back, to keep an encampment like this going 24/7, you know, days, pouring rain, heat, all of that. It's pretty impressive. Now, folks come, go to work, maybe go home and shower.
They have to live,
Exactly. But they have kept a presence there.
Making that point.
That's right.
I understand it got into some of the national press and everything.
That's right. That's right. They have really broken into the press because out of sheer determination.
Is it happening elsewhere in the country?
Because there are many efforts. Madison there are many efforts like this going on all over the country because people have seen the impact internationally and been very inspired by that. And so also in being down there. Now, there were emergency protests against the U.S. bombing, destruction of Libya that are happening across the country.
Thank you for that.
And so originally, we were going to take that to Times Square, which is a traditional place where it's been so many times before. But a lot of the folks taking part in Bloombergville said, why not bring it right down here? Let's talk about the war and the cuts, because the two are so completely linked, that there's billions of dollars to spend for war that directly profits the largest corporations at the very time that we're being told that there's no money to keep a library, a firehouse, or a school open. So, you know, one cruise missile that they fire could pay 10 teachers.
I think
and they're firing hundreds, thousands of these missiles at Libya, destroying everything built there.
Yeah, those predators, they're thinking of going elsewhere.
That's right.
I mean, if you look at it, I know. I remember Madeleine Albright said 500,000 children had to be killed by sanctions, but that was the price we had to pay. I guess 2 million people have died in that thing we do. We're
Iraq,
firing
right.
predators into Pakistan. We're firing predators down the chimney of Mr. Muammar Gaddafi. We were supposed to help civilians. Now all of a sudden we're out to kill the man. I mean, there seems to be a lot of things going kind of like off the tracks in terms of the rationale by which our geopolitical thinking is going on in Libya and elsewhere.
It's completely war propaganda. To claim
absolute
that this
propaganda.
is a war
It's
for
Goebbels would love it. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. The greater the lie, the more outrageous
right. The big
the
lie. Yeah.
And all said with a straight face and a huge gun.
Yeah.
And to be with all the power also of the International Criminal Court, the UN Security Council, NATO. Monday, actually, the reason for the coordinated demonstrations on Monday is that it's a 90th day.
That would be the 27th.
The 27th is the 90th day of this as a NATO operation.
Okay.
And
is that what that is? Yeah.
Originally, NATO said that they would come into this for 90 days. Now, of course, they've since expanded and extended that indefinitely. But it is important to know that they expected the government in Libya to completely collapse within 3 days.
I think that was because, if I may, having been there, I mentioned to you off camera as we were getting started, that's Libya. I've been maybe 8 or 9 times there, and it's the only country that I was ever interested in. And I may be all off base, but I think that Libya, what they did in Libya, one of the problems maybe with State Department or even president level or something, they just don't understand what the reality is there. And there's going to be deep felt opposition to our attacking them or to the rebels coming out of Benghazi among the people for reasons that could be understood if they understood or understand the realities of that revolutionary country. And they don't seem to take it into account.
They don't take it
even in the name of realpolitik.
Right, no, they don't take it into account. That is a stunning arrogance of power.
Right.
That what people have built with their own hands, that has been a monumental change in the lifetime of millions of people in Libya, which was the poorest country of the Mediterranean region, and has built itself up the highest standard of living and of health and of Africa. Now, so that's a huge,
quite literally correct here. Quite literally, they had a Holocaust delivered down on them under the Italian fascism. 1/3 to a half of the population was ruthlessly decimated in a Holocaust comparable or a presaging of what was to happen to the Jewish communities in Europe.
That's right.
They suffered that, and they had near universal illiteracy in 1969 when they made that revolution.
Right.
Right in the middle of the Woodstock Festival and landing on the moon. And that period, 1970, could be argued ontologically as a major period of transformation on this planet, in this solar system, in this universe. A case could be made for that. But they did that, and now they've got all the human index indicators have Libya certainly the highest, 52 only on the scale of all countries. They've come from practically 0 to highest in all of Africa. And they've got all the figures. Education's gone, literacy's 93% now from 0, and everything, housing, sanitation, electricity, all of these things have gone to the top of the mark, even in CIA figures and so forth. So there's got to be people who just materialistically would have been associated with that benefit. They had a lot of oil, a lot of money, and they spread it around.
Well, when you even see the pictures of just decades ago, sun-baked hovels, really, to now modern cities, this is within the memory of a significant
20, 30
part
years.
Of the population.
Amazing what they achieved.
It's a huge transformation. And whatever the problems or mistakes which exist in every country.
Yes, sure.
So it's not that Libya, everything was perfect. Of course not.
No, but I could make a case.
But there was this transformation. And also a lot of funding which enraged, I think, the West into development in Africa. It was Libya who put up the satellite that, you know, it used to be a fortune. The simplest phone call in Africa had to go through Europe.
Yes, right.
In order to communicate down the street. I mean, it was absolutely insane.
Colonialism is the name of that game,
right.
And it's still
by
operative.
Putting a satellite up, which Libya paid for, it transformed communication in the African continent. Now, those are the very things. Also, Libya was
investment bank. They have an investment bank to serve the people of Africa.
And a currency that was transformed. Now, of course, the French imperialism would want to change that. It was a direct threat to the French African franc, the currency.
Yeah, remember the Battle of Algiers.
That's right.
It was terrible what happened in Algeria.
That's
the
right.
French held on like demons, And now they're asserting themselves. Sarkozy ought to be in the dock, if you ask me.
But
it seems to me like a war crime.
Through all of this, it is absolutely a war crime.
You do see it that way? Okay,
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, here is a country, small population,
about 6
enormous wealth, and more than 10,000 bombing sorties. And then NATO says outrageous things like, "Oh, there's no casualties. There's no civilian casualties. Nothing is happening."
Cynthia's reporting well, isn't she, on that? She was there the day they killed the grandchild. You could smell the gunpowder going off. I mean, Cynthia's doing great.
She really.
I'm glad she's going to be.
Courageous. What Cynthia McKinney. Her trip there, and being willing to report and bring a delegation in, camera people reporting, being on the internet, that even gathering the group together, that is an extremely important action,
and she writes well too.
And she's doing now a whole national tour.
Right. She's going to be here this weekend.
That's right, and she's
talk,
coming back. She's going to a number of cities all around the country. See, I think it shows, just like in Libya, that people's resistance can come from below to these policies. Here in the U.S., certainly in Libya, it was never conceived that they could or would stand up. And instead, they have found that those who are collaborating with NATO are completely incapable of establishing any government whatsoever, or organizing any kind of resistance.
The Benghazi crew?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, also
completely incapable. It seems to be those who are strictly collaborators and want it handed to them on a tray.
You want to call them collaborators, like collaborators with Nazi in the occupation of France?
There's no other way to explain.
CIA
Some of them
has
coming
been
directly from Langley, Virginia, from the CIA.
That's right. CIA has been there, and they're doing that.
And others are royalist forces who were connected to King Idris and still maintain a political presence. That was the first force on the ground that set up this Libyan Salvation Front, that set up the Libyan Council, and so on, completely in collaboration with the West. But after a few grand statements, they still have shown themselves unable to put together any kind of effective government. And that makes a problem for the West, because unless they have boots on the ground, which is what they finally did in Iraq and Afghanistan, they can't secure anything. They can drop all kinds of bombs. And then as soon as they do that, then they're up against resistance from the population.
And we've had this War Powers Act from Vietnam. You're too young to remember Vietnam, I would think.
No, not at all. I was first active in the Vietnam
War. What year
movement.
Did you get involved
About
in?
68.
68. I was a little before that, 67. But there were people involved in that early. 62, there were. The civil rights was coming in tandem, so all of this. So that was a major time. But they had that. But people, they finally got interested in that. And then there was it came out of that, the War Powers Resolution.
Well, the War Powers Act, it's so important. It was like a concession. One from the movement of that period. And it's why we should demand
that was a magic
now.
period. That was a magic period. I could go into that, and I think it's worth going into it ontologically or something. But to put that aside for a minute, War Powers Act.
But the War Powers Act was a concession, one by the movement itself, which said that the president, the executive, cannot take the country into war without some debate or discussion.
Or approval from the Congress, as it says in the Constitution of the United States of America.
Now we've also seen Congress support and vote for all kinds of wars, including Afghanistan and Iraq. So I opposed wars that the Congress voted for. But the struggle around the War Powers Act, this has not happened in the 40-some years since it was passed.
Last time we declared war the way the Constitution said we said was the Second World War. Well, everything else was a police action, and they were all kicked off by a great big media lie. Gulf of Tonkin resolution, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and now this thing going on in Libya and so forth.
This struggle, though, going on in Washington, I think, where there's an actual call for the funding to be cut for the war. And
that's coming from Republicans, isn't it?
It's coming from a combination.
Yeah, okay.
Now, some of it is political maneuver. Some of it is just giving time while trying to embarrass Obama politically. They're not against the war.
We are coming up to an election.
All of that, though, it's not the cakewalk that they expected.
Not at all. No, that's what I'm saying.
They disregarded the War Powers Act because they thought it would be over in a few days, and it would be over in a week, and then we were told it would be over in a month, and then it would be over long before 60 days. So here we are, past 90.
Right.
And
it's a visionless arrogance of power. Who was it? Arrogance of power? Was that Fulbright, or was it C. Wright Mills or something? But it's an arrogance of power and a myopic view of what the reality is. Perhaps in the case of Libya, particularly, I would submit. But that's something that's not very well understood.
So
powerful
that one bomb will terrify a whole population. Now, 2 days ago, it was very interesting reading about it on the internet, seeing some of the images and pictures. There was a demonstration of 1 million people in Tripoli in support of the government.
No, wait a minute, not a million.
Well, that's what they claimed. I wasn't there to count it, but it was certainly a huge,
that would be huge
outpouring. There's about 2.5 million people in
Tripoli. There's going to be support for him. Everybody's got education through the university. Everybody has health care. They call it they call it a socialist.
But they're also standing up. They're standing up to the bombing. They may have all different feelings about the government. They may have grievances, but once you're dropping bombs,
they're going to rally around the flag. We would, wouldn't we? If they drop bombs on us, we rally around the flag.
Exactly.
And it's like as if they did World Trade Center, and then tomorrow they're going to do Lincoln Center, and then they're going to do Times Square, and they're just bombing us and everything, and expecting we should just go along with that because there's some people who are against. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No.
Can't we ever get empathetic with the people that we're attacking? Or the people that are in opposition to our attacking, trying to impose our idea of what has to be in order to be legitimate? Is the world ever going to get over that?
Well, the people who make the decisions are making the decisions because no matter what, the war is enormously profitable.
Absolutely. I don't think
selling weapons systems.
We are the largest weapons supplier of the world, are we not? At all levels.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
On every level.
Highest prison population.
And the largest military budget, larger than the rest of the world combined.
Right, by a far less.
And you're right, also the largest prison population. So that repression comes home. That global repression around the world comes back on the population right here. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's Hooverville. Or we call it Bloombergville, you called, don't you? Yeah.
The decisions that they make, though, to fight the wars are really based on them looking at this enormous amount of oil that Libya has.
Yeah, 17. Huge reserves. Yeah, very rich oil
plus $70 billion in literally
the sovereign funds. Is that sovereign wealth fund?
That's right.
Haven't they seized 30 million of that?
Well, they've seized a great deal that was abroad.
Yeah, that's illegal.
And they seized what was in Benghazi, which immediately disappeared. Where did that go? Yeah. So these wars
Look to Afghanistan corruption levels or something.
These wars are profitable for those who make the decisions. And they're profitable for the banks, for the oil corporations, the military corporations. And there's no calculation given to the people on the ground. That's not even a question I don't think
it's
not part of what's measured.
Is this a fulfillment of Mr. Eisenhower warning against the military-industrial complex coming to full term or not? Has it been worse in the past? Is there a period
worse? The largest
Vietnam
now
was pretty bad.
Pardon? It's absolutely the largest now that it's ever been.
Yeah.
It is a predominant force in the economy in the U.S. It's today the oil and military corporations that are decisive in many, many ways.
35 lobbyists for every congressman or something on K Street, and they're corrupt. And they're completely vested interest in their own thing. They've just trashed the whole economy a couple of years back in 2008. They got bailed out by them and everything. I got a thing.
And there's no solution. They have no solution.
Do you mind if I show this little thing? This is the thing in that your favorite newspaper, your favorite, the Wall Street Journal. This is the Wall Street Journal, and they got a picture. Can you come in on this, Josh? Or where do we come in? There we go. Where do you come in? Here? Okay, yeah. Okay, come in on. This is a combination of, on the Wall Street Journal, they're making a case for the fact that the two parties are one. And they're duopoly. They got a picture of Mr. Obama. Do you like that rendering of Mr. Obama, a combination or combine Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama? There's a continuation that's going on. Yeah. Guantanamo's still going, right?
Well, when President Obama came in,
here's another one here, Josh. You can come in. Here's one with Mr. Carter and Mr. Nixon, I think, if I'm not mistaken. The thrust of the article is
remember he kept Secretary of Defense Gates and so on. He kept most of the really the Bush appointees.
So this is a combination. I like that idea of them combining that. I said, gee, they ought to combine all the people of the world into a face recognition thing and get Ms. World and Mr. World and see what they look like to get away from
I don't know the point that they're making there.
Well, they're making a point about the
duopoly. It's the same political party.
And they're making Democrat, they're one, and they're making a growth of independence, one of which might be the Socialist Workers' Party or something like that that's relevant to how the world is going to be organized. The independence movement can be something other than the Tea Party nonsense, right? And when will it ever emerge, or what is the answer to answering the absurdity?
There's a growing alienation.
Yes, sir.
With the political system. And there's really also a growing together totally of the two political parties.
Yeah, that's the point of that thing.
Right,
that's the point of that, yeah.
True. It's absolutely true. I'm not sure the angle from which they're taking it, so...
well, they're taking it toward, for independence movement. It's Wall Street Journal, you got to trust them, right? But anyway, they're taking it, it's a book, a new book out, and they're saying that the independence movement is growing in terms of, that the people have been subject to the monopoly of the Republican Democratic Party, which have the right to tax and steal that money and stuff, and that there's a movement, an independent movement that's emerging, one aspect of which is what they call the Tea Party. But there's nothing on the left or on the side of the people.
And the Tea Party is also enormously funded by the very corporations that already control the Republicans and the Democrats.
I think it's going to all end up in the bank accounts of the Koch brothers.
Exactly. That's
more or less. So and I got that other one. I'm going to show that. But go ahead and talk to me, Sarah. I'm going to show that other one that I showed you.
A lot of people really respond on it by not voting. The lowest voter turnout in the world.
I think so, yeah.
Right here.
I'm going to hold this one up too. I just showed Sarah this one. I've shown it on other occasions. This is a chart of the. Do you mind, Sarah? This is a chart of the wealth of the world. And this is relative, it's a combination. And what it is you can see on this little chart over here, or this little thing over here, I think it's 95% of the wealth of the world is in the upper group here. And this little thing down here, this is the lower percentile. This is the concentration of wealth. You say it's worse than the 1789 France. The concentration of wealth, which is growing more intense all the time.
And the gap between rich and poor.
And the gap between rich and poor, right.
At any time in human history. At any time, not only in U.S. history, but of human history.
Yeah, so that's part of the crisis in which the world is engaged.
Yes.
And now they're going to address it by fighting. Is war a way to keep the plants turning out tanks or something, or the economy, and then also a way of keeping people's mind distracted towards something other than the misery they're suffering under the so-called leadership of the political, economic leadership of a nation?
It's sort of Keynesian military
approach.
Right. It would supposedly soak up this enormous surplus. The problem is now the economy is so fabulously productive that almost as soon as you throw money at it, it's soaked up the very next day. So militarism is no longer a solution for keeping the capitalist economy afloat, and that's a crisis for them in their own.
We are very.
It's guaranteed profits for the owners.
Few, yeah.
Right, and
Daddy
it's
Warbucks.
no solution at all. Right.
You're too young to remember that too. Little Orphan Annie with Daddy Warbucks. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, sorry.
Where the options are always war.
Yeah.
If you have, they say if you have a huge hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right,
So,
right.
Every problem, and more, even the technological solutions. Now there was a very interesting article about drones and their development technologically into things as small as an insect or a bird.
Insect, bird, what? I'm sorry, miss.
Drones.
Yeah, the drones,
that are cameras. And,
cameras,
and this assertion of the U.S. that they can fire these missiles from anywhere.
Yeah, and not risk
They're actually flown, out of Syracuse. And you have people sitting behind what are like video cameras.
Yeah, right.
And those are the very things that completely, when you have a person sitting behind a screen, they have no idea if someone getting out to pray and bending down is doing that, or they can assume why they're planning a bomb. People gathering for a celebration or a wedding. No, this is a meeting of terrorists. And so again and again, they're firing drones.
Into Pakistan all the time. They're killing civilians.
That's right.
Yeah, all over, yeah.
And those sitting behind the screens not knowing in any way what they're doing. But they have death at their fingertips.
Well, I don't know just how much. They must have some protocol or something they try to follow, but it's like something out of a science fiction
Well, I think we've all seen
horror.
the WikiLeaks photo where here's a cameraman with a camera on his shoulder and a helicopter gunship. They come around and the guy speaking on the mic says he's sure this is a gun. He fires a missile. It's a Reuters cameraman.
Right.
And just that footage shows the life and death decisions that they not only can make, but they absolutely regularly make. Missiles fired into Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Pakistan. This idea of targeted assassinations, it'll be announced, that was 8 or 10 Al-Qaeda people or Taliban. They have no way of knowing.
No, they don't know that. It's very dangerous, and you don't have to risk any loss of life at all, like the boys at Pearl Harbor had to get in the airplane and fly the thing. Now you can do it with
someone
this
sitting behind
extended,
a screen.
Yeah, there are a lot of them out in the desert in Nevada, and they have these places they do. It's a terrible kind of thing. They just bombed the university.
That's right.
Our drones went to the university, the El Fatah University in Tripoli, and Cynthia's reported on that. They've killed people, they killed civilians and so forth, and they've got this ginned up. And you have what they call mission creep. You get a thing.
Sometimes they know also who they're targeting. Now, there was one very important delegation, I think it was 3 weeks ago, of 150 imams who gathered in Libya. They were going to the city of Brega, and in a very public way to call for negotiation between the opposition and the government.
Imams,
150 imams, and then staying at a guest house. None of this was secret. They were holding press conferences. They were having announced meetings. So when NATO bombed that guest house, killing and maiming a third of the people there, that is targeted assassination.
That's a war crime.
It's absolutely a war crime.
Well,
to target religious, civilian, those who are not in any way carrying weapons of war, but actually are on a peace mission. And throughout human history, even from the earliest tribes, there were always, even in time of warfare, someone who's traveling with a white flag or for peace or for negotiation, is respected in every culture.
Sure.
Has never been a target
Right,
of war.
right.
And yet, nevertheless, NATO chose to bomb that guest house and really assassinate these Muslim religious leaders.
Well, they could do that because they represented. Remember how the British used to call them wogs? They're just wogs. They're lesser
racism,
people. There's a white man's burden. It's Cecil Rhodes. It's colonialism in the fullest extent of which that has been done for about 500 years since Columbus. And it may be that the people of the world are finally getting to the point where there's going to be something new emerging other than the might makes right kind of extension of military power. If you got the Gatling gun, you can conquer, and that's the history of the world in a large sense. Whoever's got the weapons.
Not so easy to conquer. You know, it used to be that I mean, it's amazing to me. 10 years
there is
in Afghanistan,
yeah.
They have not yet been able to do it. There was President Obama speaking about it last night.
Yeah.
Promising a withdrawal, and then you actually look at the numbers.
30,000?
30,000 out of 100,000.
Yeah.
And, of course, there are more than 100,000 extra mercenaries and contractors.
All those Blackwater guys. I think there's more mercenaries now than there are military. Is that true?
That is
statistically true?
That's statistically true.
Boy, that's like really something, isn't it, that we're getting
And the
to
U.S.
that.
also admits that they've actually lost count of how many mercenaries there are. And the figures range wildly because they don't know who all is even on the payroll and where payrolls are going. And then you have the NATO forces. So they're withdrawing 30,000 U.S. troops. But that is, you know, what, 15%. It's
about 30%, isn't it? About a 30%.
No, once you put in the contract.
Yes, because there's all these people.
There's 250,000.
And all those people are on the payroll and everything like that and everything. And it's you know, like Hessians or something.
It's not a withdrawal.
Yeah.
And that is what it's put forward as a position. We're winding down the war. We're going home. The troops are coming home, all done with great publicity and fanfare and media coverage. And that's not what's happening. And also what he's promising is an escalation in the drone attacks.
It's going to go to Yemen now, maybe the Syria's in the sights, you know, and this kind of thing, and Libya. And then they had the piece in the paper today, Lieberman, and they're saying, we've got to win. Because if Gaddafi is held on, and he's got a lot of support among the people there that they seem not to have been counting on at all. He didn't have a great military, but he did have a faith in militia. They're handing out guns to people to protect the revolution that was made by him, because it did benefit the overwhelming majority of the people of that country enormously in a very short period of time, because they took the money. It was like Norway. They had very rich sulfur-free oil right next to the market. It was there. And he negotiated, and what he did is they called it a socialist, Jamahari, a people's Congress, you know, the state of the masses. His title is the translation of the term. Jamhora is like a republic. And when we think of republic, or we think of historical legitimacy, we think of the American Revolution against since feudalism and the dynastic states of 1,000 years after Rome. And we come over here and set up a new system across the ocean, a bunch of bumpkins over there. And they come, and we fought a war, which we won, and made a change in terms of the drift of legitimacy, in terms of the way the world's going to be organized. If you can understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
Isn't it essentially the modern world, as we think about it, we think about the historical the idea of history. Where is history moving? Does it have an arrow? Does it have a direction? Where is it moving? And where is legitimacy to be found in terms of notions of how the world's to be organized? It seems the one that is most prominent is the one from essentially modified through time, the United States model.
Well,
that we call that legitimate
That
thing.
Is legitimate, and anyone else's
if I may,
upheaval.
what I'm saying is, it's not legit. What's his name? Nietzsche once said, the future influences the present as much as the past. We're reifying outdated institutions, and we're claiming historical legitimacy for a way of organizing politically and economically a society which is out of date with the reality. We're rather like the feudal order arguing for the old Ancien regime in 1789 France, rather than having a future look at what the new reality is that's emerging. we are the biggest problem in the world because we're trying to reify outdated institutions, notions of human nature, virtually everything that's been qualitatively transformed at the level of capability, and it's signaling a time. Isaac Asimov said this is the defining generation in the evolution of consciousness in this universe. There's no mention of that anywhere.
I think what happened also, it's enormously threatening to, particularly to the U.S., the very powerful upheaval, social upheaval, political people's movement in Egypt and in Tunisia.
Okay,
I mean, movements that
Egypt and Tunisia are not Libya.
That's
Libya
right.
is a unique breed of cat. I'm trying to make an argument for it.
No disagreement with that.
Well, maybe or not, yeah.
Here you had these enormously popular multi-million, I mean millions of people in the street in
quite
Egypt.
literally true, yeah.
And the U.S. is trying to reassert their domination in the region through fear and through smashing a state that is right between the two. And they thought it would be an easy walk.
Cakewalk, yeah.
And also they thought that by sending in forces that were supposedly popular forces, but these are old monarchists, they're out of the CIA, to grab a hold of Benghazi, the oil pool, really the oil center.
How long has these CIA people been in there? Do you have any chapter and verse on that?
Well, in 1983,
coming in from Egypt,
in 1983, they set up what was called the Libyan Salvation Front.
Okay.
And it has existed on the border in Egypt. It was for a time in Sudan until they were kicked out of there, like a mercenary Contra army, such as existed, was used against Nicaragua and so on.
Yeah, the Contras,
But that existed of Libyan Contras on the border with Egypt and was maintained.
By CIA, among others, CIA.
And financed and funded.
Okay.
And there also are royalist forces that are still tiled.
They want to go back to monarchy.
To King Idris, who wasn't overthrown so long ago, 69. So those families, those clans, that grouping,
it's tribal,
had every interest in a return. But
there's also
the moment came because there was upheaval and turmoil in the entire region, and how to push it back, what's happening in Egypt and Tunisia and throughout the entire Arab world, using Libya as a war in Libya as a way of reasserting military dominance. And they thought it would be an easy way to do it, to make a stunning, smashing destruction would create fear again. But they didn't calculate that the Libyan people would stand up and resist.
Well, most
weeks
people,
and weeks, months, now 90 days. Under
and he was in the Wall Street Journal today saying he's going to be there forever. He's not going to back down.
Well,
at all.
I think
he's not going to just go quietly.
He's not going to go.
And he's got
quietly.
support among that. That's the thing they can't understand. How can they? We've given all this propaganda, and the Senussi. And
they have problems not only in Washington on the War Powers Act and all of that, but today Italy announced that they are no longer going to allow their bases to be used for the NATO aircraft.
That's a beginning to undercut it.
It's a political struggle that Berlusconi is in. But it's important because
Sarkozy.
all of this they thought would be over and done quickly.
Yeah, just get it over quick. It's like the old British march in and just show them wogs a thing or two. It's the same old European attitude.
In an earlier day, but actually in Libya, at a time when it had a much smaller population, they fought the Italian colonialists for 10, 12 years.
Well, that was part of a Holocaust, darling.
Absolutely.
They had a quarter.
But I'm saying that level of resistance.
They had concentration camps in the desert.
That's right.
It was a precursor to what was going to happen in European
movie,
Jews.
Lion of the Desert.
Yeah, well, that would be for Omar Mukhtar.
That's
he
right.
was the leader of the resistance, and that was in the East. And also, that's right. But they've got that tribal. It's very important. They got the Senussi, and then the Gaddafi, and then another, the Confederation. And the Senussi and the Benghazi have never cottoned on, because at a tribal level, to Gaddafi. But he's done that. He built that river project. The water came up there. It's going to make it bloom like the Imperial Valley, and we're blowing everything up in smithereens. Now, is it we want oil? We want that oil. We want control over it. It's just a colonial thing. They say they're going to protect him. There was opposition to him, just as there was opposition. It occurred to me.
Well, they want the oil.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, the normal imperialistic understanding.
The enormous financial reserves of Libya, too, but they also are threatened by any country
that won't
attempting
toe the
independent
line.
development.
Yeah, no, you can't toe. You
right.
got to. Yeah.
I mean, actually, Gaddafi made many concessions, and he actually, at U.S. demand, he totally disarmed.
That's after 203. That's after 203. He tried to come in out of the cold, as it were, because he had been an anti-imperialist.
He disarmed, and he actually turned his weapons over to the West.
You think he did that because he looked at shock and awe in Iraq?
Completely.
Or do you think
this happened right after the U.S. absolute smashing of Iraq?
Yeah, horrible. Horrible.
And after shock and awe,
$3 trillion
was publicized around the world.
And it's $3 trillion Mr. Stiglitz is projecting for that thing in Iraq.
And at that time, Gaddafi said, we'll reach an accommodation. He turned the weapons over.
Saif, his son, who is, I saw Saif in 1986 when he was on a little cart after we had bombed and killed his daughter, the house. His house, we're at his house about 2 or 3 times the size of a house here. It's not a great big palace or anything. And they killed the daughter, and Ramsey was there right away to represent the people, 400 million, 100 people. We had bombs going in on 86 and everything. But Saif was there. He'd been wounded. But he had been to the London School of Economics, and he'd taken a PhD, and it was earned. Ben Barber was, I'm not sure if he was one of the advisors, but he attests to the legitimacy of it. It wasn't a bought thing. But he was studying. And so they were trying to, there may be a shock and awe. It was pretty nice. You know, it's like a bull in a china shop is going crazy and everything. But it was also that they were trying to make an accommodation with the world, and that they had a model and so forth. And they had reached all these development things. They had huge sovereign funds. He did have this idea of trying to denominate oil in gold. They have a great deal of gold. That would have been a real challenge and so forth. But he had been an anti-imperialist. He's got the support of practically every American Indian nation that had to fight against colonial European you know,
and every African nation.
And African, and among the people, and who he's got, and Nelson Mandela counted him one of the great saviors and overcome of apartheid. So he's essentially been on the side of what is normally called the least among us, that the wisdom school said, which the leaders of the world don't care at all about. All they care about is going to a 12-star hotel and feathering the own nest of the power structure, trying to kiss the hand of the people who are already wealthy and make them wealthier. That's the attitude of the West. And he was in support of the people. Chavez likes him. We got a new president in Peru now that's going to cotton up to Evo Morales. So there's something going on. But he was in support of the people. And you can't have anybody like Robin Hood. You can't have anybody that's really trying to do something for the masses of the people rather than the power elite. Right? That's more or less something. But he came out of the cold and tried to make a rapprochement with Saif and that. And it was the Goldman Sachs and those people just screwed him royally. And they insisted he get rid of the subsidies. You've talked about that.
Exactly. One of the most important
things. The structural adjustment
even though there was no deficit whatsoever in Libya, there was a huge surplus. The demand of the IMF was that they do away with the subsidized housing and food and electricity and energy.
By which...
And the only purpose of that was to try to undercut popular support. And it actually was quite damaging. But this was a demand coming from the West. It was not a policy from the Libyan people at all. But
it was
their
a demand by,
if you're going to come away with your weapons of defense, and do away with the subsidies.
Trust us so we can screw you. You know, that's essentially what it is. That's a European attitude toward the lesser people. They're lesser people.
And
we're historically
faced with
legitimate.
Shock and awe, he agreed to some of these things. It's important to recognize, though, not enough for them. As soon as they saw an opportunity to totally replace the whole system and institute what would really be complete colonial rule, they went for it. They went for it.
Here in the recent experience, you mean just here in the recent experience with the? Okay,
I'm saying that even though there were many concessions made, it's never enough. They don't trust.
It's like
that he's really their
vassal.
Person.
You have to be a down on the ground groveling vassal in order to be accepted.
Also,
I mean, it's a little overdrawn.
Their anger was these big reserves of
oil.
Cash, of resources, and of oil.
He helped get
weren't
OPEC
being
going.
Invested in the West. See, if it was all coming here into Chase Bank, into Goldman Sachs, and so on, that would be fine. But if you're seeking to invest it into Africa, into development.
Yeah, but who cares about Africa? Let them kill each other. They don't care. They don't care about the poor.
Their attitude is to be threatened, though, by Libya's effort to actually improve the standards in Africa and the technological and industrial development of Africa.
Okay.
That's a threat to them.
Okay, and good. We talked before. Tried to get a historical pattern. Isaac Asimov, polymath, thinking big, not just politics, not news, thinking big about the evolution of everything, says it's something to consider by people who want to think. This is the defining generation of 200,000 years of human evolution. We evolved 200,000 years ago, 10,000 generations. This is the defining generation. A lot of people may have thought that in the past, but in real terms, that can be argued at a level of reality. In the terms of the fact, one of the things that happened along about the same time is we were able to extend our consciousness into tools and technology and make the world different than in an Eden-like sense is the given lot of the evolutionary process, Bartlett. And we finally did, and the leading edge of that has been throughout all of history, which James Joyce called a nightmare of injustice from which we're trying to awaken. Maybe we got a point, was weapons. Weapons, so you would get, Medici wanted Da Vinci to make a siege machine to get a control over the other tribes so you could steal their grain, make yourself rich, realpolitik, which still operates at the mind of the people in that. But that we reached a point where those weapons became, and it was about 1970, by the modeling, species lethal. That's over 200, people don't seem to think, I'm older, that seemed to be very much a part of it. About 1970 is when the weapons became, if they were to be unleashed in a spasm of irrational hatred, which has been our want.
Right, it would be the end. Right.
It would be, the end, yeah. It not the case in the past.
That's
it had
true.
not been.
That's
We were protected in our impotency in a gestating way, historically, up until about 1970. And that was a point when they reached that kind of lethality. And is there anything to be said for the fact that this may be a time of qualitative, paradigm of end time, perhaps? Not just another continuation of continuing injustice, of the rich getting richer and the rest of it with each fighting, but this is a time of qualitative transformation. The negative side being we can now kill ourselves with the ability that we've been doing in terms of political organization and so forth and just fight realpolitik in the name of power. But is there something over on the positive side? Because that technology that exists can be liberating of everybody in a way that they have not been throughout history or been able to. And the technology, you can do more with less, good design, and that we could take care of everybody and the ecology, maybe transcend material scarcity as an ontologic reality, maybe equally significant in terms of the level of modeling, and we don't have anyone recognizing that there's this qualitative transformation that's taking place, and we don't have a system that relates to the future, what the future requires.
Well, here's what technology can do, because it can actually work against the powerful, and has at other historical junctures, so we can only hope that today it's also possible. At this point in history, the average person, which is different than any other historical epoch,
thank you,
knows and has the ability to know what's happening not just in their family or in their village, but on the other side of the world. And actually feel outrage and anger at injustice. The whole world can stand with Palestine and feel a real identification.
Hold a minute.
Or with Libya.
Okay.
Feel a real identification. And that ability of the media, I don't mean the corporate media,
no,
but I mean of people to both speak to each other and know of people in other cultures and identify with them. Mm-hmm. It's not taken into account by the rich and powerful.
No,
they're used to using the political control mechanisms of past generations.
Yeah,
and they're not taking into account that at a certain point there is now the ability of people to understand their own interests.
Well, they vote against it all the time. And Vance Packard had written books on the hidden persuaders.
Consciousness can change
and those
quickly.
Guys,
in a revolutionary upheaval, you can have people who one day say nothing is possible, and this was certainly shown in Egypt, in Tahrir Square.
That's true.
I mean, I was in Egypt 2 weeks before.
Were you?
Development. We were on our way to Gaza. It was like tons of cement on the population, and no one could ever see it ending in their lifetime. No one.
Prisons, torture, the whole thing.
Nor did they think they had the ability to challenge the government. And then suddenly,
guy out of Tunisia burned himself.
This encampment started. It grew, and it exploded.
Were you there while it was going on?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, you were there before.
I was watching it from here, but I'm just saying that even 2 weeks before, no one could conceive that this would happen. But when it happened in the millions. And it really forced Mubarak out. Now, that's not the end of the struggle.
Not at all. You got 40 million people with poverty. They got living on garbage heaps, and they're still going to be living on garbage heaps in years from now.
But what was clearly the U.S. pawn and dictator for the entire region, which is what Mubarak represented, he is gone, and it has created a real crisis in U.S. political.
What are they going to replace it with?
How are they going to exactly?
And then also the thing in Bahrain, they got the Fifth Fleet.
It's all shaky. You have Bahrain, you have Yemen. This was
and you got the big kahuna Saudi Arabia, and they're going to be producing the oil that we need and all that kind of thing.
So there are big changes
in
consciousness that can happen and that do happen.
But don't they have a great ability to manipulate it?
Of course.
Like Goebbels said, big lie. It still applies. We have that.
It used to be they had total and absolute control.
That's true.
Earlier times would say that a pope or a king was the absolute ruler, and everyone genuflected.
Divine right of kings. Now it's divine right of bankers. You know, there's a few bankers who run the world, and they can
be challenged.
They've got endless amounts of money. That little chart we show, it's just pouring into them with so much money to buy congressmen. Where are your? They want to go over there and say, "Where's your democracy?"
It's unchangeable, or
it's a corrupt system.
Or we say
it's all run by money.
It's not only unchangeable, but it is so fragile. Their system.
Okay.
It's based on an economic system that's collapsing. That's no longer able to provide.
That's a huge assumption. That's a huge issue. That they're coming to the end of where they can do that.
The average person in the U.S. knows that life isn't getting better.
They can smell it. They can smell it.
Right. There are not young people.
2008, I mean, all that, we bailed everybody out, and they're not going to...
We bailed bankers out. We didn't bail
No, I meant the bankers. We bailed them out, and then it said, are they going to create jobs or something? Are they going to do that? And Keynes said, you're going to not need workers in the future. I think that's why I asked, you come from a left thing. I'm wondering about the ability to have this labor theory of value or surplus labor theory of value apply to economic theorizing. I think it's really got some questions. Keynes said you're going to have massive technologically induced unemployment, among other things. It's structural. It's not just that. And also, if they can take all that money and get 300% more return in some slave system across with no environmental, the banks aren't going to be able to do it, and they're free to work in a global world. So those benefits are going to them also in terms of being able to manipulate these things ever more, get everybody so on a page where they will scrape the ground to just get a little food to eat or something. Have them real like down, ground out serfs is something that they have the ability to create with all of the wealth and power that they have. And manipulation of the ad agencies.
But it might also be that people aren't willing to go back to being
Well, they usually do. They will suffer tremendously, the Dowds and so forth. They will suffer tremendously rather than... We've tried revolutions. We did the Bolshevik thing. We did the socialist revolution. Are we going to create how are we going to form capital? Are we going to do away with private sector? What is the solution, the world that we can see at the end of this dire, walk up or crawl up Mount Sisyphus that we've been going on in the name of human history, what kind of a world is it? By what terms are we going to politically and economically organize the world, the nations, the people, and the world itself?
I would just say that there's now the productive capacity for everyone in the world.
And the ecology.
And to live with plenty.
And, okay, do you realize, now wait a minute, do you realize what you just said? That undercuts virtually all of the organizing assumptions of all of history, that we've lived in scarcity. That is no longer applicable in terms of our design. We need an operating manual for Spaceship Earth that takes that into account, that new capability, and it doesn't come from anywhere because we're so busy just saying, who's the bad guy? Is it the Republican or this? And we're arguing in the same old way, and we don't have, it's at a level of design. That we're coming to a new way of, and that would, we have to have a whole new economic system, and what is the basis? How are we going to do it with private sectors, public? Libya had a model that was relevant to the future. If you formed capital, you had private sector. Don't do away with it. They can own their own property. You can own private property, but a business had to be owned by the people.
Right.
So when you form capital, ownership, capital, stock, ownership, which the Marxists would like to do away with, many of them, surplus labor, is, and the labor is being displaced, but ownership of that has to be disseminated democratically to everybody in order for them, if nothing else, to have money to clear the market, which they're not going to have, and you're going to get a deflationary depression of it.
Well, some of those solutions,
and he had a model that did that. In Libya, if you had a business, the people, you couldn't hire anybody. They had science, partners, not wage earners. They had tried to lead to it. Not only participatory democracy, they had meeting halls everywhere. The whole country met in participatory. That's an advance of representative, where you have all the lobbyists can buy everybody. Anyway, but then at the private sector, you got a private sector, but they had to be the owners of the capital assets. The owners of New York City who do electricity should own Con Edison. They should own, and we just let it all go in the private sector.
There are many experiments that are very, very important.
They got that thing in Spain, Madrigal.
Several million people can experiment and operate successfully and cooperatively, then certainly 6 billion people also could. So there's a validity to all kinds of social experiments, especially...
Where are the models?
Well, you just gave one.
One was Libya. It's the only country in the world I know of that tried to set it up that way. Everybody else.
No, but there have been many other experiments, and certainly Cuba today is also a very viable experiment.
Well,
and has led to the highest, even with all. And again, no country is perfect. There's lots of shortages. There's lots of. But the highest health and education standards.
That's right.
Of the whole Western Hemisphere, higher than the U.S.
I know. And
so,
listen, I'm really sorry.
So that's a rather successful experiment.
Yeah, okay.
And these social experiments,
and they're coming together.
Happen all over the world.
Yeah,
they are immediately targeted by those who want all control in the hands of a very few.
Yeah, they're
so
used to
anything
it.
that involves people coming to grips and solving these problems themselves
has to be
even
attacked.
in a union.
Yeah, they're going to break the. They're going to do away with the. Yeah, right. The whole threat.
Yet humans will keep trying that.
All right,
because
we'll
they
keep
have
trying.
No choice. But
We've run out of time, and one of the places where so much of that.
There is very important. There's a demonstration on Libya, Stop U.S. Bombing, on Monday at 4:30.
That's the 27th. And you're going to talk to ACAP this evening on the 27th of June. You're going to come and give us some chapter and verse on this kind of thing, for which we thank you.
So this Monday, come down to City Hall.
Yeah.
That is really an important time. Come down to City Hall to stand with Bloomsburgville against the budget cuts, and also against the war on Libya. To say those really war dollars have to come home right here.
Yeah, they're really getting it drawn. Lieberman and those people, and who's the other guy? That I forget the other one who's in Wall Street Journal. We got to do it because if Gaddafi stands, They can't have that. They're going to be so embarrassed. It's almost $1 billion that they've spent.
Well, it's an attack on people's movements here and there.
Yeah.
And the more we can try to make those links to where people say no to the war in Libya, bring the money here.
Right.
That's an important link.
Yeah,
the idea of beginning at Bloomsburgville or Hooverville and marching on Wall Street and then back on Monday. That's another thing we're trying to do, is to experiment politically also, not only in the demands that are raised and making those links, but in the kinds of actions.
Yeah,
this encampment 24/7, as I say, now in its 10th day.
All right, great. Making trouble again, are you, Sara Flounders? You're up on the barricade.
All kinds of challenges.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you very much, Sara. So good to see you. Up the good fight. I mean, it's really good. And Ramsey Clark and all the people that are doing that. And it's really, but it is something to be living in these times, because I really think there's glimmers of the possibility we may be seeing some
dropping bombs on their own money. I see